The Kienzan, otherwise known as the Destructo disc in the English dub, is Krillin's signature technique in the Dragon Ball franchise. First debuting in Dragon Ball Z, the Kienzan allows Krillin to infuse his ki within a circular structure, which he then launches as a projectile at whatever his target is, with devastating effect as it cuts right through the enemy. This has given the technique and Krillin a legendary status in the Dragon Ball franchise, as many of the other main characters have also borrowed this move throughout the years. However, over the years, a lot of fans have boasted about the cutting ability of the Kienzan, and stated that the ability can cut through literally anything or anyone in its path. But is that actually true? Can the Destructo disc cut through anything? Or perhaps are there things that have stopped it in the past? Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss that. Now, in order to take an in-depth look at this topic, I'm going to have to examine all of the evidence on the table, which I'm going to divide into this video in two different categories. First, with that being the evidence for, and the second, of course, being the evidence against. Now, as far as the evidence for the Destructo disc being able to cut through anything, let's begin at the start. When Krillin first debuted this technique in the fight against the Saiyans, in particular, using it against Nappa. Now, Nappa was multiple times more powerful than Krillin at this point, and was effortlessly defeating the entire Z fighters all on his own. He had tanked some of the most powerful techniques that had ever been demonstrated at that point, like for example a tri-beam so powerful that it actually killed Tien when he used it. However, when it came time for Krillin to use this technique against Nappa, it quickly became apparent that it would have been more effective than any other used so far, as right when the technique was about to hit Nappa, Vegeta yelled at his Saiyan comrade and told him to get out of the way, which he did just in the nick of time, as the Destructo disc cut through his cheek and went right through a mountain behind him, which was a very similar feat of strength to what Piccolo demonstrated in the fight against Raditz, when Raditz dodged the Makanko Sappo, and the beam went straight through a mountaintop. Now, the fact that Nappa had to get out of the way of this technique, and that it actually was capable of cutting through him, which no one had really been able to do at that point, shows that the move is capable of making up for a massive disparity in power, and that it makes a much weaker Krillin a threat for far more powerful characters. However, the thing that demonstrated that the most so far would have to be what came next, on planet Namek, when Krillin cut off second form Frieza's tail. Now, Krillin at this point had been powering up throughout the Namek saga after his hidden potential was unlocked by the Grand Elder. So by the time that he came face to face against Frieza, his power at this point was likely greater than most of the members of the Ginyu Force, which I discussed more in depth in this video you can check out here. However, against Frieza's second form, that meant pretty much nothing, as Frieza's power level in that transformation was stated to be over 1 million, the highest of any power level we had seen at that point. But even despite this, Krillin was still able to cut off his tail, showing that even the defenses of someone as powerful as Frieza could still be pierced by the Kienzan. Now, a lot of people might attribute this to Frieza simply being caught off guard. However, as we saw earlier, Vegeta blasted Frieza at full power when he was completely off guard, and yet it still didn't do any damage to him. And additionally, when Krillin used the multi-Destructo disc technique and threw a number of them at Frieza simultaneously, he still made an effort to get out of the way. All of this seems to be pretty much showing that Krillin still could have been able to cut through Frieza, despite the fact that the power disparity between them was at least 10 times. And that's giving Krillin a pretty hefty boost. And later on, toward the end of the arc, what's the technique that actually took down Frieza in his 100% power form when he was fighting against Super Saiyan Goku? Well, none other than the Kienzan, or perhaps a very slightly different version that Frieza created. You can actually make an argument that Frieza learned this technique from Krillin when he finally ended up using it against Goku. However, in Frieza's case, he seemed to upgrade it by being able to move the technique around using his hands. But nonetheless, it shows that even the most powerful being in the universe up until that point could still be taken down by this technique. And that wouldn't be the first time that this technique was used by someone other than Krillin, because Goku also borrowed it from his old friend when he returned to the Earth after the Elder Kai sacrificed his life to give Goku a new one, right when Bootanks was charging up a technique that would allow him to destroy the Earth and wipe out Ultimate Gohan as well as the other people gathered there at the same time. However, when Goku showed up in just his base form, he was still able to create a technique in the Destructo disc that allowed him to cut through Buu and stop him from destroying the planet. Now that right there is a very significant feat, considering the fact that Goku was not powered up into one of his various transformations. He didn't have to go Super Saiyan 3 in order to throw this technique and cut Super Buu in half. And not to mention that stated in the anime and in the manga that Goku's Super Saiyan 3 was inferior in power to Super Buu in just his base Super Buu state. And this was after he absorbed the power of Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks into his body, as well as Piccolo. So that means that Goku, when he was hundreds of times weaker than his enemy, was still able to cut through him and stop him from destroying the Earth. With that being said, we've seen over the course of the story that Buu's durability is very inconsistent, and oftentimes it seems like he's purposely not putting any kind of guard up or energy into his durability so that he could actually avoid damage, considering that he basically had the most broken regeneration in the entire franchise up until that point. So we even see things like bullets piercing right through him after he first transforms. So you might be able to take this one with a grain of salt. With that being said, let's now get into the evidence against the Destructo disc being able to cut through anything. And when it comes to this evidence, pretty much all of it is anime exclusive. But nonetheless, if we're considering the anime canon of this franchise, and when it comes time for Dragon Ball Super, a lot of that anime stuff is carried over into it, then it's definitely something worth considering. With the first one actually being from an anime exclusive arc in the Garlic Jr. saga, when Vinegar, who's one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon Clan, otherwise known as the Spice Boys in the English dub, actually is able to catch one of the Destructo discs that Krillin throws at him, and then redirects it, which in turn means that someone powerful enough, or at least skilled enough, can definitely catch this ability when it's thrown in midair, assuming that they meet those prerequisites. Or in the next case, they can just straight up tank it. Because perhaps the most damning example against the Destructo disc being able to cut through anything happens in the Cell saga, specifically right after Cell absorbs Android 18 and achieves perfection. After this happens, Trunks and Krillin attempt to take out Perfect Cell before he can spring into action and wipe out all the Z fighters. And this is when Krillin throws a Destructo disc right at him. However, despite the fact that Cell is completely caught off guard, he doesn't even have his defenses fully raised, and is literally too busy admiring his own perfection to even notice what's happening, the Destructo disc literally does 0 damage to him, passing through his neck and not even cutting him along the way. Now, over the years, a lot of people have actually tried to argue that perhaps Krillin did cut through Cell's neck, and his regeneration was just so fast that we couldn't even tell, but I'm pretty sure that Cell would have reacted if somebody cut his head off, especially right after he became perfect. I mean, just look at how he reacts after Vegeta blasts his arm off, or anyone does any real damage to him at all. So this pretty much proves that if someone is powerful enough and their resting durability is high enough, then Krillin's Destructo disc will literally do nothing to them. Which is further backed up, of course, by what we see when Super Saiyan 2 Gohan is fighting against Perfect Cell. And naturally, at this point, even though Cell had gone 100%, he was getting totally dominated by Gohan, which prompted him to create 2 different Kienzan of his own, and throw them at Gohan at full power. However, Gohan was able to catch them and take absolutely 0 damage at all, which again shows you that these can be overpowered. And furthermore, when we get into Dragon Ball Super, the technique seems to be even more devalued, as during the Tournament to Power, Krillin throws a disc right at the enemies from Universe 10, which happens right after they surround Krillin and the other fighters. In fact, all of them use their signature moves against these fighters, and literally none of them do any damage, including Krillin's disc. Now, of course, you have to question why Krillin would use such a deadly technique in a tournament where if he kills someone he would be disqualified, but obviously he wasn't thinking about that at the time. But that's okay, because Goku wasn't thinking about any of that either, considering the fact that when he was fighting against Jiren, he created a bunch of Destructo discs and threw them all right at him. And this is when he was a Super Saiyan Blue. But again, because Jiren's plot armor and his power was so ridiculous at that point, he was able to punch and kick right through them, and eventually catches one and throws it right back at Goku. Now, with that being said, the blades did accomplish something significant here, as they were actually able to cut through the Kachikachin that the ring was made out of, which is the most durable metal in the entire multiverse, even more so than the block that broke the Z-Sword in the Buu saga, which, as we know, according to Toriyama and the Elder Kind Dragon Ball Super was actually made by Beerus. So simultaneously we have an example here for and against. But overall, when we get to the conclusion here, I would have to say that based upon all of the evidence, it seems clear that the Kienzan or Destructo disc cannot cut through literally anything, at least in the anime. All of these examples of it failing did happen in the anime, which of course is Toei's interpretation of the material, and oftentimes Toei has very wonky power scaling and contradictory elements throughout, especially in Super. But nonetheless, in Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super, there's a number of things that the disc cannot cut. Now as far as the manga goes, there's actually a chance that it can perhaps cut through anything. But again, it does seem unlikely. Otherwise, why didn't Krillin simply use it against Frieza again after he used the Solar Flare on him, rather than asking Vegeta to blast him? Also, why didn't he ever try that combo on any of the most powerful villains after that point? You could say that out of universe, Toriyama simply didn't want Krillin to win, but ultimately it seems more likely that this isn't just some unstoppable ability that can cut through anything and kill anyone who can't regenerate, or isn't a weirdo like Frieza who can survive with half of his body cut off. Instead, the move seems to be based on the person who's using it at the time, with Goku likely being able to make a far more powerful, or at least sharper blade, that can cut through far stronger or far more durable targets than anything that Krillin can. However, if the power difference is big enough, it ultimately doesn't matter, because in Dragon Ball, techniques are often trumped by pure power. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.